So it's a little bit different when, you're teaching a class at length and you can just continue on, week after week and what have you, as opposed to me or anybody else just stepping in for one Sunday and then it goes back to the other teacher. Because next week is, I believe, Israel and Bonnie's last Sunday. And so then I think I'm going to be up there. I think I am, or Jerry, somebody's, I don't know. Anyhow, that being said, so we're actually going to be in the book of Judges this morning. And normally in my classes, I absolutely love discussion and what have you. This class, though, I'm going to try to keep that at a minimum. Still, if you have a question and you have something you want to say, then by all means. And the only reason that I'm going to try to keep it as a minimum so that we can get through the entire class, since I won't be up here next week, if that makes any sense. You know those movies you get, they got a cliffhanger at the end, and then you've got to wait 18 years for a sequel? Yeah, we don't want that. Mm-hmm. See, I didn't hear that. So if you say something, you've got to talk that low. But we're Judges chapter 6. We're going to start there. We're not going to spend a lot of time there, actually. We're primarily going to be in Judges chapter 7. And we're starting with the thought of William Gurnall. William Gurnall, he was a 17th century English author and Anglican clergyman. And he said that we fear man so much because we fear God so little. And we fear man so much because we fear God so little. And, we question, is that statement applicable to us individually? Is it applicable to us as a congregation? There at the beginning of verse 4 in Galatians chapter 6, Paul writes, "Let each man examine himself." And the beloved apostle John says in 1 John 3 and verse 21 that if our heart does not condemn us, then we can have confidence before God. So we're looking at this idea that we fear man so much because we fear God so little. And I don't know when it is the last time you studied the book of Judges. I know that I've mentioned it a couple of times, the cyclical process that the people go through. That they're faithful, then they end up sinning against God. A judge comes, and then the people repent, and then God forgives them. And then they're good for a little bit, and then they sin some more, and then there's punishment, and then another judge, and then God forgives them. And so it's just kind of that process, really. Chapter 6 is really what sets the stage for chapter 7. And what's about to happen. And in an effort to save time, we can actually summarize the problem that Israel is going through by just looking at 2 verses. There in Judges chapter 6, we look at the beginning of verse 1 and the end of verse 10. So the beginning of verse 1, then the sons of Israel did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh. And then the end of verse 10 in Judges 6, you have not listened to my voice. So we have a people that are doing what is evil in God's eyes. Why? Because they're not listening to what God has to say. That really sums up what's going on in the entire book of Judges. And it sums up the world at large, if you want to say it that way, that people are doing evil because they're not listening to what God has to say. It's really no different. And I saw, especially now with the current political climate, I saw someone had posted a meme, an image on Facebook, and at the top it had a Bible sketch, wooden cupboard thing of King Herod, and it said, kill all the babies. And then it had below that a picture of our current Congress saying, kill all the babies. And then below that, there was the caption, times really haven't changed. Is that so? Culture, modernization, technology, and all of these things may change, but ultimately we run into the same moral problems regardless of what era we live in. And it's because people are doing evil because they're not listening to what God has to say. You've heard me say it before, 2 Chronicles 7 and verse 14. If we turn from wickedness, if we seek God, if we're repentant, then, he sees that and he forgives the sin and he heals the land and what have you. So here we have a nation of people who they're in a period of great upheaval. Again, it's that cycle of disobedience, repentance, and deliverance. Disobedience, repentance, and deliverance. And here they're in their fourth stage of apostasy by this point. The first apostasy that occurred with Mesopotamia in Judges chapter 3, and they were delivered by God through Othniel. In their second state of apostasy, they were conquered by the Moabites and the Philistines, and this also is in Judges chapter 3. And they were delivered by Ehud and Shamgar. The third state of apostasy there in Judges chapter 4, they were conquered by Jabin, who was the king of Canaan, and delivered through Deborah and Barak. And so then we come into this fourth state of apostasy, conquered by Midian, delivered through Gideon. That actually covers the beginning of chapter 6, up through the end of chapter 8. And so it's this part really that we're going to be examining in the time that we have this morning. So we look there in Judges chapter 6, the beginning of verse 5. For this is talking about the Midianites, for they would go up with their livestock and their tents. They would come in like locusts for number. Now, some translations will say like grasshoppers. What's that mean? Swarms of locusts. I think that King James renders it as grasshoppers. Maybe the ESV does as well. Now, that's not only because of the number, but it's because they consumed almost everything and left it all destroyed. In fact, if we drop down to verse 13 in Judges chapter 6, it's so bad for these people that Gideon asked, why has all this happened to us? Where are all the wondrous deeds, or some translations, miracles, which our fathers recounted to us? See, he remembers all of this because if you think about Deuteronomy, in Deuteronomy chapter 6, what the parents were supposed to do. Teach these statutes to your children when you rise up, when you lie down, when you walk by the way. Write them on your doorposts. So he had heard all of his life about these wondrous things that God did. And then the Midianites come in and they conquer them, and he just has to wonder, why is this happening to us? What about all these wonderful things that our fathers told us about? Now, is that any different than today? If something goes wrong, or whether it's individually or as a congregation, and we ask, why is this happening to me? Or why is this happening to us? What about all these wonderful things that I see occurring at other congregations? What about all these great things that you're doing in the lives of these other Christians? What's going on? Why is this happening to me? Again, technology and all of this may change, but it all comes back to the same problem, people not listening to God, and the same question, why is it happening? Right? And so then he commands Gideon in verse 14, go in this strength of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Have I not sent you? So Gideon and the people of Israel, they're going to go into battle, understanding the sovereignty of God. Now, there's one thing about the Midianites. They did not destroy everything when they came in. And that's just really logic talking to us, because they were a people who they would conquer, they would take goods and services and slaves and whatnot. Well, if you wipe an entire people out, then your cash cow is gone and you've got to start doing the work yourself. So they would leave some behind, they'd leave some food behind, otherwise the people would starve and die, and then they've got to go into war over here and deal with this. And so some of it is left behind, but it's the sheer number and it's the sheer destruction. Those grasshoppers, that swarm of locusts come in. Believe it or not, you can actually go on YouTube, and there's a video, not of Gideon, of course, but you can look up a swarm of locusts in Africa or something. And there was a swarm that happened several years ago to where there were so many locusts, it actually blacked out the sky. And you can see that on there. That's the kind of idea that we get here. And when we're looking at this, in this lesson, I want us to consider us being fearless. You know, they're going into battle, understanding the sovereignty of God. And for us to move forward as fearless Christians, we have to understand that as well. We have to recognize that God is the creator and sustainer of all things, and that we have to be more fearful of him than we are of man. Unlike the William Gurnall quote, that we fear man so much because we fear God so little. And we have to be fearless not only in living our faith, but in proclaiming our faith as well. The reason that the people turned toward apostasy is because there were times when people did not proclaim the faith boldly. And as you know, when we were in our previous Old Testament study, that there was a point where even the priests were not proclaiming the righteousness of God, when we were looking at the minor prophet there, that they were participating in the wickedness as well. So I want us to look at being fearless this morning in not only living our faith, but in proclaiming our faith as well. Matthew 10:28, he says there, don't fear those that can kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, fear those who can destroy both the body and the soul. Because even when someone destroys the body, they still don't have your soul. Even if someone puts you in a state of indignity and they take your dignity from you, they still don't have your soul. No matter what pressure, no matter what persecution we go through, the one thing that man cannot take from us is our soul. And that's the number one reason why we should fear God more, because he can take both. So let's go ahead and we're going to look at a few different reductions here of the people. Does someone mind reading verses 2 and 3 of Judges chapter 7? We're going to go ahead and skip now to Judges chapter 7, but does someone mind reading just verses 2 and 3? Don't everybody jump at once. Oh, yes, sir.
And the Lord said to Gideon, the people who are with you are too many for me to give Midian into their hands. What's that word? Least Israel. Moving on.
Lest Israel.
Become boastful, saying, my own power has delivered me. Now therefore come, proclaim in the hearing of the people, saying, whoever is afraid and trembling, let him return and depart from Mount Gilead. So 22,000 people returned, but 10,000 remained.
Okay, thank you, sir. So this is what we'll call the first reduction. The first reduction, and I want you to think for a moment that you're Gideon. The Lord has sent you to deliver the people. Remember, there's this punishment going on. The Midianites have Oops. The Midianites have come in, and you're asking, why is this happening? So God says, look, I want you to go deliver the people. And then he comes about where, Gideon, he's looking around, and there's 32,000 troops standing shoulder to shoulder. Would you be a little less fearful then? If you're looking out at your army and you see 32,000 people, I'd be a little less fearful of the enemy. It's one thing to see, some soldiers scattered here and there, but you get 32,000 soldiers lined up shoulder to shoulder, you'd be a little bit less fearful. And probably if you went into battle with that and won, you might be a little boastful and say, the victory is mine. God thinks you would be boastful, and that Gideon and the people would be boastful. So that's one of the reasons why he's telling them, okay, you need to let some of these people go. When we consider our faith, we see the same thing. It's easy for us to be boastful when we're standing shoulder to shoulder with other Christians, when we're gathered in an assembly. And I'm not talking about arrogance here. It's easy for us to be a Christian. We're here in this building. We're with people of a like-minded faith, or when we're in our homes having a Bible study or what have you. But it's easy to be a Christian because we're with people who have a like-minded faith, standing shoulder to shoulder with us. And it's easy for us, even that we might not be feeling it, to stand our ground and sing victory in Jesus. But look at what happened to Gideon's army, though. So he calls the fearful, God does. The first reduction, 22,000 people pick up and leave. 22,000. So it's one thing to see these soldiers scattered around. It's something else to see 32,000 standing shoulder to shoulder. And then it's something altogether different to see 22,000 that were standing shoulder to shoulder take up and leave. Imagine every pew in the congregation filled end to end. And then all of a sudden, the back half all stands up at once and just walks out the door. You kind of start to wonder what's going on a little bit. Is something happening? Do they know something that you don't know? That type of thing. Fear has a domino effect. If you've ever studied or looked at great battles, it's typical to see that if one person turns and starts to run away, others are surely going to follow them. Because they were there, they were standing shoulder to shoulder with these others, they became fearful, they ran, and then the next soldier starts going with them, then a few others, and the next thing you know, the entire army is retreating, and the commander is standing there saying, "What are you doing?" Yeah. Yep. Now, and God gives a reason for having these soldiers leave there in verse 2. Yahweh said to Gideon, "The people who are with you are too many for me to give Midian into their hands, lest Israel honor themselves, saying, 'My own hand has saved me.'" So it wasn't that God couldn't deliver them with more people. It was a matter of, I'm not going to deliver you with more people because you won't give me the honor and the glory that I deserve. Instead, you're going to say that you're the ones that did it. You're going to be arrogant about it. And how many times have we, in our arrogance, overcome a trial, a temptation, an addiction, and never thought of giving God the glory? I mean, just how many times in our life have we encountered a problem and then we make it through that problem and God is not even a thought? It's just, I'm glad that's over. Or I made it another day. Dodge that bullet. And not once thinking, and I'm not saying this is every occasion, and I'm not saying that it's for everybody. I'm sure that everybody's had at least one of those moments, though. to where we don't even think of, God, thank you for pushing me out of the way of that bullet. Or God, thank you for getting me through another day, or through this trial, or through this temptation, and what have you. So just as he did with Gideon, God spends time in removing those things from our lives that are going to cause us to stumble. Certainly not everything. Job, should we accept the good and not the bad? New Testament, he causes his rain to fall on the just and the unjust. So yeah, sure, there's still going to be stumbling blocks. But God does spend time taking things out of our way. And he's taking things out that distract us from acknowledging who he is and what that true authority is in our lives. Again, not everything's going to be removed. We still need to be tested. We still need to be proven. We still need to be battle ready. If you have a soldier if you have someone who enlists in the military, but they never go through the pains of basic training, they're never tried, there's never those just kind of random, blow of the bugle and them getting into formation and getting their gear together and the preparedness training that they go through, all you end up with is soft, lazy soldiers who end up forgetting what their training was. In fact, a lot of times going into battle, the CO, the commanding officer, will say, remember your training and you will make it out alive. What if they didn't have that training? What if they didn't have those trials? It's the same for us. We go through trials and there are stumbling blocks in our lives so that we can get closer to God and we can learn how to overcome them, not by us, but with God's help, and how God helps us through. It keeps us battle ready, right? Fear not only has this domino effect, but it also demonstrates a lack of trust. And the first thing that God did was take away the people who did not trust him. Those people that are fearful, if they're fearful, tell them, get up and go. If they're afraid, if they don't trust me, tell them to get up and go. Could you imagine if God stood before us, gave the Great Commission, and I'm talking literally, 2022, Jesus stands up, all the Christians are all gathered together, shoulder to shoulder, says, go into all the world, preach, teach, baptize, teach them to observe, Matthew 28, 19 and 20. And then he says, but wait, before you go, if you're afraid, get out of the way. How many people do you think would leave? If God gave that opportunity. And so, just imagine that. How many people would hit the back door running? Nope, this isn't for me. Sorry, don't think so. Huh?
Same as during Jesus' time.
Yeah, absolutely. Some were there, followed him for the food, and then when he started teaching, oh, nope, I'm out. And many people left him. Same thing. How many of us would not only run, but still expect to hear, well done, good and faithful servant? There's a lot of people that are fearful of what's out there, not trusting in God. Maybe it's from something in their past, maybe, experience that they've had, I don't know. But just the idea of leaving off there. Or would we be like Gideon, who back in chapter 6, he recognized that God had given sign after sign after sign, and he says, I know that you're sovereign. I know that you're in control. So that's the first reduction. We've got 32,000 standing shoulder to shoulder. If you're afraid, leave. 22,000 people gone. that also probably has to instill a little bit of fear in the remaining, right? Saying, true. It depends on where their faith was placed, absolutely. But I think that out of the remaining, that there's going to have to be at least some, several, many, who are watching 22,000 people leave and start to shake in their boots a little bit. This is just the nature of people. But no, absolutely where their faith was placed. But we're also going to see a second reduction. Does someone mind reading verses 4 through 8 of Judges chapter 7, verses 4 through 8? Okay. Verse 8. Yeah. Thanks. So this is the second reduction. There's a requirement here. So Gideon's army, it's now just 10,000 men. We'll say men who are unafraid, men who are ready to die for the freedom of Israel. But then there's two types of people that are involved in the second reduction. Some brought the water to their mouths. Some knelt down and licked at the water like an animal. Now, why do you think that those who got on their knees and lapped the water like a dog would be removed? Why do you think that is? Not as watchful. An illustration that might help you, you think of a deer at a stream, right? That you notice how it's just drinking the water, doesn't have a care in the world, not paying attention to anything outside, its surroundings. It's no focus. Now, how might that look for a person? They're not focused on their leadership. They have no way to see which way he desires them to go. And a person not focused on the leadership cannot only lead other people astray, but can get other people killed because they're not paying attention. My dad, he volunteered for Vietnam and did a couple of tours, and he didn't talk to me much. There were very few things that he told me that he went through in Vietnam. But one of the things was they were out in the bush, and they were there. It was night, and it was like you'd see in a movie, I guess. There was someone keeping watch. They were keeping watch in shifts. There were generally two of them that were keeping watch, and these two guys fell asleep. And next thing you know, the VC, the Viet Cong, they were in the perimeter there, and the only way that they knew is because I don't know what the military ordinance is. There was a tripwire that set something off, and that was the only way that they knew. And on that particular tour out in the jungle, they had set it, I think, another 20 yards than they normally would, because their commanding officer, their squad leader, whatever, had told them that there was reports of several VC in the area, and so they were going to extend the perimeter out. That was the only way. Those people fell asleep. Now, obviously, we're not dealing with tripwires and everything here in Gideon's time that's, going to set off flares or, any type of military ordinance or what have you. But imagine, though, the person who's supposed to be watching your back, who's supposed to be, keeping an eye out for the enemy while you're doing this and what have you, but they've got their head in the sand, so to speak. They're like a dog. They're lapping at the water. They're not paying attention to their surroundings at all. They're only interested in satisfying their current need. And so God says, no, we can't have that. We need people that are laser focused. We need people that, one, aren't fearful because they didn't leave with the first reduction. And we need people who are going to pay attention to what's going on around them. And we need people who are going to focus on the leadership as well. And that they're going to focus on me. How is that like us? We can't be fearful as Christians. We can't run away anytime someone just disagrees with our faith. And not only that, but we have to pay attention to our surroundings and what's going on. And I'm not just talking in the world, I'm talking in the church as well. Sin in the camp. We need to have each other's back. We need to watch out for each other. Because I'm not just trying to get me to heaven, and I hope that you're not just trying to get you to heaven. But I hope that you're trying to get others to heaven, to include your brothers and sisters and your immediate family, and focusing on them while following the leadership, right? And so we look at that. As Christians, we've got to pay attention to our homes, our places of worship, our brethren, and what have you. We need to be aware of who we are and what we're doing. Proverbs chapter 4, verses 25 through 27. This is Proverbs 4, 25 through 27. It says, "Let your eyes look directly forward, and your gaze be straight before you. Ponder the path of your feet. Then all of your ways will be sure. Do not swerve to the right or to the left. Then turn your foot from evil." And then Philippians 3 and verse 3, "This one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind and reaching forth unto those things which are before," or straining for what lies ahead. It's like, don't be deceived. We think of the broad way and the narrow way, right? The broad gate and the narrow gate. Well, going into Jerusalem by the broad gate, because that's where most of the people were able to go, because it was a wider gate. Now, there were several gates in Jerusalem. But you have this broad gate, and along the way there are these little shops and street vendors and what have you set up. And they would set up there because there were more people. It was a way for them to make more money, to sell more goods and what have you. And what happens generally when you're going through? You go, oh, that's nice. I'm gonna come. This is a good fabric, and look at this bracelet. Oh, hey, honey, check out this bracelet over here, and right? And it's not just women. I'm not saying that, but you get distracted. So it takes you longer to get in there, and sometimes and by the time you get in, you're broke, right? The narrow gate, not so much. People aren't setting up shop there. Not as many people. There's still some people along the way because it's real crowded over here. So they're gonna set up along that, in front of that narrow door, on that narrow gate. They're not going to get everybody, but they're going to get a few. The people who aren't paying attention and who aren't focused. And we have to be aware, and so it's set your mind on what lies ahead. Don't be distracted by the things over here, not on the left, not on the right. Focus on the prize. Because even Paul would say, look, I'm doing all of these things. I'm preaching the gospel and I'm teaching people. Baptized a couple, but, thank the good Lord, I haven't baptized all of you, and all of this. But he says, I haven't gotten there yet. I'm not going to get there until I die. There are so many people who think that they're saved now, and that they have the idea of the once saved, always saved, not realizing that if you're not faithful until you die, you can lose it just like that. So we've got this first reduction of fearful people. We've got this second reduction of people who aren't paying attention. Now, you might start to look around a little bit. You started off with 32,000. Now you're down to 300. And we could translate even that over to a congregation. Oh, man, I remember when we used to be 500 people. Wow. I just see people go here and people leaving here. What's going on? And I'm not saying that the people who left are fearful, or I'm not saying that. I'm just saying. So let's real quick, because we don't have a lot of time left. Let's look at the reinforcement. Does someone mind reading verses 9 through 14? 9 through 14. Anybody? Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's right. So, speed it up. So let's look for a moment at this reinforcement. I might go a couple of minutes over. We're going to finish this, though. So we're still imagining ourselves here as Gideon. Like I asked you to think of yourself as Gideon in the beginning. Things have changed since you first arrived. You don't see 32,000 people. You don't even see 10,000 people. You've got 300. So maybe there is a little bit of fear starting to creep in. Maybe you're wishing, man, I wish God had just called someone else, you know. But there's encouragement there. And if Gideon being afraid, you know, it's understandable. We look at verses 13 and 14 again. Gideon came, behold, a man was recounting a dream to his friend, and he said, behold, I had a dream. A loaf of barley bread tumbling into the camp of Midian, and it came to the tent and struck it so that it fell, and it turned upside down so that the tent lay flat. And his friend answered and said, this is nothing less than the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. God has given Midian and all the camp into his hand. So not only has your army been reduced, but the enemy knows you're coming. Not only have you gone from 32,000 men to 300, the enemy knows that you're coming. Now, military tactics would say that is not the right time to attack. You know, that's the time to lay low. It's time to retreat, get reinforcements, and then come about it a different way or what have you. But there's encouragement here. And there's encouragement for us as Christians. You know, as Christians, we need encouragement. 1 Thessalonians 5:11. Comfort yourselves together and edify one another. Hebrews 3 and verse 13. Encourage one another while it's called today. Encourage one another while you have the opportunity, because the opportunity is not always going to be there. Encourage one another, because you may have someone who falls away from the faith, and then you go try talking to them, and they're going to say to your face, you never cared about me before. This is the first time you've ever said 5 words to me. And I had to leave the church for you to do it. Exhort, encourage one another while it's today. And we see that very thing here. God encourages them. He encourages their faith. And if we don't encourage the faith of each other, if we don't encourage the faith of leadership, the congregation doesn't go anywhere. God, He reinforced their faith, their hope, and their trust. If you have faith in God, if you have hope in Christ, if you have trust in His Word, then you are ensured a victory. Now God says, or it says here in verses 15 through 18, now it happened that when Gideon heard the account of the dream and his interpretation, he bowed in worship. And he returned to the camp of Israel and said, arise, for Yahweh has given the camp of Midian into your hands. And he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, and he put trumpets and empty pitchers into the hands of all of them, with torches inside the pitchers. Then he said to them, look at me and do likewise, and behold, I will come to the outskirts of the camp, and it will be that just as I do, you do likewise. And I and all who are with me will blow the trumpet. Then you shall blow the trumpets all around the camp and say, for Yahweh and for Gideon. So in the face of impending war, Gideon is going to make sure that his life is right before going into battle. He gets on his knees and he worships and he prays to God. After 2 reductions, after going from 32,000 to 10,000 and to 300, when the odds are really stacked against them if we look at it from man's perspective, he sees the encouragement of God and he worships. He did not wait for victory before he praised God. He praised God before because he knew the victory was there. That's how we have to be. We need to praise God knowing that the victory is already won. The devil just doesn't know it yet. We're also, if you remember, in the 4th occurrence of apostasy, some of the military, they could have been of the opinion because of everything that they had done before, that God would continue to forsake them, and that might be a reason for the fear. But what did the Lord tell Gideon back in chapter 6 and verse 14? Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you? Oh, please don't ring that bell. We're going. God has charged us to go to war. Paul writes, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, against the rulers of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Take unto you the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand evil in that day. So very quickly, 19 through 25, we're going to look at the retreat. This will be very quick, I promise. So Gideon and 100 men who were with him came to the outskirts of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, when they had just set up the watch, and they blew the trumpets and smashed the pitchers that were in their hands. Then the 3 companies blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers, and they held the torches in their left hands and the trumpets in their right hands for blowing, and called out, a sword for Yahweh and for Gideon. And each stood in his place around the camp. Then all of the camp ran, and they made a loud shout and fled. So they blew 300 trumpets. And Yahweh set the sword of one against another, even throughout the whole camp. And the camp fled as far as Beth-Shittah toward Zerara, as far as the edge of Abel Maholah, by Tabbath, by the men of Israel. And the men of Israel were summoned from Naphtali and Asher and all Manasseh, and they pursued Midian. Now Gideon had sent messengers throughout all the hill country of Ephraim, saying, come down and meet Midian and capture the waters before them as far as Beth-barah and the Jordan. So all the men of Ephraim were summoned, and they captured the waters as far as Beth-barah and the Jordan. Then they captured the 2 princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb, and they killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb. They killed Zeb at the winepress of Zeb, and they pursued Midian and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon from across the Jordan. So the approach of Gideon very quickly causes such confusion that the Midianites, they turn their swords and they start to kill each other before a single Israelite had even raised a sword. But Gideon, he's going to see things through to the end. And it's not just enough for the Midianites to flee from Gideon and the military there. They chased them out down the hills. It's not enough for them to just see them leave the immediate vicinity. They wanted them purged from the entire region. And Gideon called these messengers from around to wage war against them as well. And a comparison can be made here at the church today and what we see going on, see what we're doing, what we could be doing better. When we see error in the brotherhood, it should not be tolerated on any level. And we should chase it to such a distance, not that it's just not a part of the congregation, but that it's not a part of the church. Get it out of, it's not good enough to just have it out of our view. It's to get it out of the religious world. Gideon we are not just dealing with the people here. We are going to chase them down. He went from 32,000 to 10,000 to 300. He was fearful, saw the victory of God and said, God's got this. Let's take care of it. That's exactly how we need to be. And he called the others for support. We need to support our sound brothers and sisters in Christ. People having a gospel meeting or a lectureship or something like that we can go to. We need to support that and encourage that. One of the reasons why those aren't so frequent is because no one shows up, not even the brotherhood. We have to be fearless, not only in living our faith, but in proclaiming our faith, in chasing error out, and searching for truth wherever we may find it. Any thoughts, closing thoughts or comments? Sorry I didn't leave a lot of time for comments, and I'm sorry that we went 5 minutes after and everything, but I do appreciate it, and I hope you got something out of it. And you go back to Acts next week.